In the annals of financial crime, few names resonate as profoundly as Bernie Madoff, a name that became synonymous with one of the most audacious and devastating Ponzi schemes in history. Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive into the Bernie Madoff case. Today, we'll unravel the intricate web of deception, the staggering sums involved, and the lives forever changed by this monumental scandal. But before we dive into the heart of the matter, let's take a moment to understand who Bernie Madoff was and how he managed to orchestrate one of the most elaborate financial frauds the world has ever seen. From his humble beginnings to his rise as a respected figure on Wall Street, Bernie Madoff's story is one of ambition, charm, and ultimately unfathomable deceit. Join me as we explore the Madoff case from every angle, uncovering the shocking truth behind the billions lost and the lives shattered in its wake. So, let's dive into the intricate world of Bernie Madoff and the financial scandal that shook the world.
Bernie Madoff sits in jail. The wreckage of what he's done is still taking place. 4 people have now committed suicide, including his son, all because they trusted him.
While the bogeyman might not be real, merely mentioning the name Bernie Madoff has the power to evoke fear and anxiety in the hearts of his countless investors, whose once thriving portfolios were obliterated in an instant. Madoff, a renowned financial investor whose reputation and track record were so exceptional that individuals clamored to establish accounts with his company, experienced a catastrophic downfall in December 2008. This collapse occurred when the true nature of his investments and returns was revealed, exposing Madoff as the mastermind behind the largest Ponzi scheme in history. In order to untangle his web of deception, the FBI practically set up camp within Madoff's offices. A squad of nearly 15 specialized agents spearheaded the operation, assisted by law enforcement collaborators and a cadre of FBI financial analysts. The collective efforts led to Madoff being sentenced to 150 years in prison. Meanwhile, his associates, some of whom professed ignorance of the scheme, received different lengths of imprisonment. What is a Ponzi scheme? In such schemes, a fraudster persuades their targets to invest in unconventional ventures, promising substantial financial gains in return. However, the perpetrator fails to utilize the invested funds as originally pledged. Instead, the deceitful individual utilizes the funds to reimburse previous investors, often diverting some for personal expenditures. Madoff's beginnings. In 1960, Madoff operated as a bona fide market maker, facilitating connections between prospective stock buyers and sellers. Subsequently, he ventured into an additional enterprise wherein clients entrusted him with their funds for investment, known as an investment advisory business. His father-in-law, an accomplished accountant, directed clients to him. These client referrals greatly benefited the young Madoff, but his fortune took a turn for the worse when he executed an ill-fated trade, resulting in substantial financial losses. He couldn't bear admitting that he had incurred such significant losses for his father-in-law's acquaintances. Consequently, he began camouflaging it with a series of fabricated transactions. This deception set off a chain reaction, and thus the Ponzi scheme took root. How the scheme worked. 10 years later, Madoff brought David Kugel, a skilled bond expert, on board for the lawful segment of his enterprise. Kugel displayed remarkable proficiency in scrutinizing the market for bonds from companies whose prices were lower than the stocks of the same companies. This technique involved purchasing the more affordable bond, converting it into the higher price stock, and subsequently selling the stock, thus profiting from the price differential. This financial maneuver is termed convertible bond arbitrage and is a legitimate and recognized financial strategy. Madoff requested that Kugel document the specifics of his transactions and provide them to him and his accountant, Annette Bongiorno, who joined the company in 1968. Kugel complied by furnishing meticulous index cards, which Bongiorno diligently preserved in a designated box. These cards were later discovered by investigators following Madoff's arrest. What is an arbitrage trade? In these trade scenarios, investors identify the identical stock available in two distinct markets. They acquire the more affordable stock in one market and subsequently sell it at a profit in the other market. This trading strategy is entirely within the boundaries of the law. 1 year into his tenure, Kugel established a private account within the company's investment advisory division. Upon receiving his initial monthly statement, he couldn't help but notice a striking resemblance in the trade details. They mirrored precisely the arbitrage transactions he had executed for Madoff's reputable enterprise, albeit with varying quantities. He's well aware that it's all historical data. Arbitrage opportunities are time-sensitive. Back in the 1970s, these opportunities would only be open in the market for a brief span, sometimes just a few minutes. Today, they can be as brief as a few seconds. Kugel's particular skill lay in identifying and seizing these arbitrage chances before other traders could. Once a trade was executed, the opportunity evaporated, leaving no additional profits to be gained since Kugel had already exploited them. As Kugel observed those same trades he had personally executed, but with different figures and for different accounts, he grasped the impossibility of the situation. Immediately, he's like, this whole thing is a fraud. These are fake trades. This constituted the foundation of Madoff's fraudulent operation. While the trades and gains themselves were unquestionably deceptive, the underlying financial methodologies were authentic. Kugel had, without realizing it, bestowed upon Madoff and Bongiorno an appearance of credibility. Upon learning the reality, Kugel did not raise any objections and carried on disclosing his trades, capitalizing on the outcomes. Madoff granted him the authority to determine his own salary. Kugel amassed a substantial fortune by withdrawing substantial sums through the scheme, enabling him to amass multiple millions. He even possessed residences in secure, exclusive communities in Florida and on Long Island. Special Agent Shannon Fish, one of the FBI's investigators, told reporters that Bernie knew he had to take care of these people because they knew what was going on. With Kugel now part of Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, the company adopted various additional tactics to maintain the illusion of substantial profits for its Ponzi scheme account. Alongside Bongiorno's manipulation of Kugel's trades, she employed another tactic that, though rudimentary, proved remarkably effective: perusing the Wall Street Journal. Bongiorno delved into archived editions of the newspaper to pinpoint the stocks that had exhibited the most impressive performance in the previous month. Subsequently, she would select the most lucrative option, fabricate a quantity of shares that the investor had purportedly purchased, and document the resulting profit on the client's statement at the month's end. Everybody's a financial genius with 20/20 hindsight, right? As audacious as the deceit may have been, the company established in-house protocols for managing the Ponzi account. Access to it was restricted to a select few, and it remained entirely separate from the accounts associated with Madoff's legitimate enterprise. To prevent any potential suspicions from clients, a vigilant watch was kept over each account. In cases where clients were acquainted and might scrutinize their statements, the figures needed to generally align to avoid arousing doubts. Despite amassing a portfolio worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Madoff's Ponzi scheme comprised just a handful of accounts. This limited client roster enabled Madoff's firm to oversee these accounts through strategies like those employed by Kugel and Bongiorno. Additionally, the company implemented stipulations regarding minimum account balances. Prospective investors in Madoff's investment advisory business typically needed to deposit a minimum of $1 million and maintain at least that amount as a balance. These regulations ensured a consistent cash flow for Madoff and, paradoxically, fostered an aura of exclusivity within the financial community. To have an account with Madoff meant you were special, but it was also self-serving. He's a market maker, and he's not supposed to be engaged in this investment advisory business. Any individual conducting an investment advisory enterprise is required to register it with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Initially, Madoff established the investment advisory business as a secondary venture, yet he neglected to officially register it. Had he done so, it would have exposed him to the potential for audits, jeopardizing the entire scheme. Instead, Madoff concealed his investment advisory activities under the guise of his legitimate operations. It's this widely acknowledged but unspoken truth within the circles of Wall Street insiders. As Madoff's investments expanded, so did his stature and influence. As the years passed, Madoff's company expanded to encompass his brother Peter, who assumed the role of the firm's compliance officer, and various other staff members brought on board during the 1960s and 1970s. Each of these employees actively partook in the Ponzi scheme and remained with the firm until its ultimate demise. The firm grows, and so do the lies. The recommendations Madoff garnered from his father-in-law continued to pour in, rapidly constituting a substantial share of the Ponzi scheme account. Madoff's father-in-law had retired by this point, and the accounting firm, now known as Avellino and Bienes, exclusively invested with Madoff. Prosperity reigned for both enterprises until the year 1992. In 1992, the SEC reached out to Avellino and Bienes due to concerns that the firm was functioning as an unregistered investment advisory business. This communication triggered Avellino and Bienes to inform Madoff about the impending investigation, uncovering a more profound issue. Avellino and Bienes were effectively conducting their own Ponzi scheme in parallel to Madoff's. What's even more troubling, the monthly statements prepared for their clients didn't align with the statements Madoff had in his records. Basically, their lies are different than Bernie's lies. Madoff grew increasingly anxious. He understood that once Avellino and Bienes informed the SEC that all of their funds were placed in his company, investigators would seek to cross-reference the statements. This would expose the entire operation as a sham. The disparities were far too substantial to offer any other plausible explanation. The documentation Avellino and Bienes possessed outlined an entirely different financial approach than what Madoff claimed. Furthermore, the account balances were askew by an excess of $100 million. Madoff instructed his team, including Bongiorno, to revise financial statements and strategies for the past 3 years in order to align with the records held by Avellino and Bienes. Although the statements were entirely fabricated, every detail had to give the appearance of authenticity to SEC investigators. The SEC expressed satisfaction with the congruent documentation, but mandated the closure of Avellino and Bienes. Consequently, all of its clients were required to receive checks for the entire amount of their account balances. Ironically, as per the recently fabricated paperwork, these funds were supposedly held by Bernie Madoff Investment Securities. A significant obstacle arose. Madoff didn't possess sufficient funds in his bank account to issue the checks, amounting to approximately $440 million. Failing to provide the funds would likely prompt the SEC to conduct a more thorough examination of his financial records. Madoff secured a loan by borrowing stocks from a wealthy client and using them as collateral. Madoff concealed the actual purpose of the loan from the client, and his deception proved effective in obtaining the necessary funds. Subsequently, Madoff issued the checks to fulfill his obligations. However, since almost all of Avellino and Bien's clients were initially invested with Madoff, 95 to 98% of the clients returned the money to Bernie and established direct accounts with him. Madoff managed to weather the crisis, yet he refrained from officially registering his investment advisory business. This raises the question, how did he avoid the same problem that led to Avellino and Bien's downfall? It's because he's Bernie Madoff. In fact, a Wall Street Journal article attributed him with saving the Avellino and Bien's crisis. His face even appeared in the iconic dot matrix sketch for which the newspaper is renowned. Madoff's stature in the Wall Street arena skyrocketed, leading to his appointment as the chairman of the Nasdaq Composite in 1990. Following the Avellino and Bien's crisis, Madoff assumed responsibility for approximately 2,000 more clients. This posed fresh challenges. Given the sheer volume of new accounts to deceive, Kugel's and Bongiorno's methods proved insufficient. A new strategy was imperative. The resolution emerged from an unexpected quarter. Initially brought on board in 1975 as a mere errand boy at the age of 18, Frank Di Pasquale ascended the hierarchy of Bernie L. Madoff Investments and ultimately formulated an intricate tactic known as split-strike conversion. Split-strike conversion involves a process where individuals effectively acquire stocks and then safeguard their purchase by engaging in the buying and selling of options. An option stands as a distinct transaction that grants someone the ability to either purchase or sell a stock at a predetermined price and within a specified time frame. The strategy is technically sound, but doesn't yield consistent long-term profits. However, it can generate substantial gains, especially when fictitious figures are employed. In order to circumvent any reporting obligations with the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, due to the firm's lack of registration as an investment advisory business, the firm opted to reinvest the stocks into treasury bills at the conclusion of each month. This move was strategically chosen as treasury bills are not subject to audits. The growing scheme draws greater scrutiny. In 2001, two financial trade publications published articles raising doubts about Madoff's supposed investment advisory business. This business, although not officially acknowledged, boasted the highest returns on Wall Street, managing a portfolio nearing $7 billion. During an interview for the Barron's article, Madoff dismissed inquiries about his strategy, deeming it proprietary. The articles are essentially suggesting that his investment advisory business, which is widely known on Wall Street, could potentially be a massive fraud. These articles pique the interest of the SEC. Bernie begins to feel apprehensive. He directed the firm to generate an extensive volume of fabricated documentation, ensuring there would be records ostensibly substantiating the legitimacy of the trades. Di Pasquale enlisted the services of two computer programmers who had been instrumental in automating his split-strike strategy. Investigators came to refer to them as the computer boys. George Perez and Jerome O'Hara were responsible for fabricating false records. To illustrate the extent of Madoff's elaborate scheme, the firm went as far as producing counterfeit documents for all of its purported trades. The Depository Trust Company, DTC, maintains comprehensive records of every stock transaction. Perez and O'Hara managed to procure genuine DTC statements and replicated them in large quantities. They even went so far as to hire an additional programmer to devise a custom code that replicated the unique font of the statements. The team positioned the fabricated statements against windows that were bathed in sunlight, meticulously scrutinizing them alongside the genuine statements. While the fake statements weren't flawless, they were sufficiently convincing to deceive an unsuspecting observer. This is where their efforts went. They dedicated countless hours to this. Then, the pivotal moment arrived. In 2004, the SEC reached out to Madoff, signaling their intent to audit his firm. The SEC held suspicions that Madoff might have been engaging in front-running activities using his bona fide market maker business. The theory posited that in the process of pairing buyers and sellers, Madoff gained access to confidential financial data, enabling him to execute personal trades before representing his clients, an illegal practice. Although Madoff meticulously fabricated a multitude of paper documents to lend an air of authenticity to his records, there was one crucial aspect he failed to address: identifying counterparties. Given that all of Madoff's trades were fictitious, there were no actual counterparties involved. The question then arose: how did he manage to evade scrutiny from the SEC? What is a counterparty? When you make a stock purchase, there must be a seller, typically a financial institution known as a counterparty. Madoff held the belief that the SEC, being a government entity, operated within budget constraints. He reasoned that if he included foreign counterparties in his records, the auditors would be deterred from seeking approval for costly international phone calls to verify them. An employee at Madoff's firm conducted research to compile a list of European counterparties, and the computer boys subsequently assigned these counterparties arbitrarily to each of the stocks undergoing audit. Strikingly, none of the foreign counterparties were ever contacted or verified. As a result, the firm successfully cleared the audit. A year after, the SEC revisited Madoff's offices for another audit. Once more, the firm bombarded the auditors with an abundance of paperwork, effectively inundating them with information. On one particular evening, as the auditors departed for the day, one of them inadvertently left a briefcase behind. Madoff and DiPascali took the opportunity to go through its contents. In the briefcase were the queries the auditors intended to pose to Madoff's staff the next day. However, the firm found itself lacking the necessary paperwork to address one of these questions. Consequently, Madoff directed his staff to toil through the night in order to generate the required documents. Over the course of 2 years, Madoff's firm underwent 5 separate audits. Through a combination of deceit and fortunate circumstances, it successfully cleared each one. The market crashes. Madoff and his team were indulging in a lavish lifestyle. A number of employees had withdrawn millions of dollars over time, splurging on extravagant cars and residences. DiPascali, for instance, possessed 2 boats, while Bongiorno had 2 houses and was in the process of constructing a condominium. Madoff, the ringleader, was even more opulent, boasting ownership of 4 homes, including a penthouse in Manhattan and a residence in the French Riviera. He also possessed 3 yachts. However, as the fall of 2008 approached, sustaining this opulent way of life would prove to be increasingly challenging. The financial landscape was in turmoil as Wall Street crumbled. Firms were either consolidating or facing bankruptcy. In multiple cases, the government stepped in to secure loans or rescue companies, expending billions of dollars. The stock market witnessed a daily decline. It seemed as if the financial world was in freefall, yet a stark contrast could be observed at Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. Surprisingly, gains were still being reported, with an average monthly return of 1%. Anxious investors found solace in the performance of their Madoff accounts, but many remained eager to withdraw their funds. When everyone demands their money back simultaneously, it signals the demise of any Ponzi scheme. Madoff's investment advisory business, which was essentially a Ponzi scheme, lacked the funds to meet the withdrawal demands. Although the paper value of the accounts was in the billions, and investors had requested a total withdrawal of $1.5 billion, only $300 million was actually available in the bank. Madoff was in a state of frantic search for an investor who could provide an infusion of cash to bridge the gap, but he was unable to find anyone willing to make the investment. On December 3, 2008, Madoff discreetly took Frank DiPascali aside. He confided, "I've run out of funds." Madoff confesses to the scheme. Exactly a week later, on December 10, 2008, Madoff hosted the company's traditional Christmas gathering, during which he distributed bonuses ahead of schedule. His sons, Mark and Andrew, who had been part of the firm for quite some time and harbored growing apprehensions, finally confronted him. Madoff suggested, Let's head to the house and have a conversation." Upon arriving home, Madoff purportedly disclosed to his sons and wife, for the very first time, the fraudulent nature of his firm. He admitted, "I've been running a Ponzi scheme, and we've run out of funds." This revelation led to the sons severing all connections with both Madoff and their mother. They promptly left the premises and contacted an attorney. Subsequently, the attorney contacted the SEC, which in turn reached out to the FBI's New York office. The following day, special agents from the FBI paid a visit to Madoff's residence. They directly confronted him about the allegations. The agents stated, "We're here to determine if there might be an innocent explanation." Madoff's response was unequivocal. "There's no innocent explanation. I've been orchestrating an extensive Ponzi scheme." Following a brief conversation, the agents contacted the Assistant United States Attorney, who concurred that it was appropriate to apprehend Madoff. Madoff maintained that he held exclusive knowledge of the Ponzi scheme and operated it independently. Although he admitted to orchestrating the scheme, he began to fabricate details about its operation. He also asserted that he would refrain from providing testimony that might implicate others. Madoff entered a plea of guilty and was found guilty on March 12, 2009. On June 29th, he received a sentence of 150 years in prison and was subsequently relocated to a federal correctional complex in North Carolina. He passed away in April 2021 at the medical center within the prison. At the time of his passing, he was 82 years old. Investigating Madoff's team. In the absence of Madoff's cooperation, investigators shifted their focus to his staff members. Although they all professed their innocence, investigators dismissed the notion that a single individual could execute a multi-billion-dollar fraud entirely on their own. DePascali, who served as the firm's chief operating officer, confronted charges that carried the potential for a life sentence. In April 2009, 5 months subsequent to Madoff's apprehension, he reached out to prosecutors, proposing to collaborate in return for immunity. While prosecutors declined his offer, they underscored that cooperating would be in his own best interest. Convinced, DePascali decided to cooperate. Over the course of the subsequent 3 years, the FBI meticulously scrutinized every document within Madoff's office and conducted numerous interviews with victims in order to ascertain who aided Madoff in the scheme. This extensive investigation led to the identification of dozens of individuals, and eventually, 14 of them faced charges. Among these, a number chose to plead guilty or collaborate with the government. Peter Madoff, Bernie's brother and the firm's chief compliance officer, entered a guilty plea, but did not engage in cooperation with the FBI. He received a 10-year prison sentence. Over the course of the fraud's duration, he had appropriated $15.7 million. As part of his penalty, he relinquished all his and his family's assets, which encompassed their residences and over $10 million in savings. Out of the employees, only 5 steadfastly maintained their innocence. This group included bookkeeper Annette Bongiorno, along with the computer boys, George Perez and Jerome O'Hara. Their cases proceeded to trial, with DePascali serving as the primary government witness. Ultimately, all 5 employees were convicted. The computer boys received sentences of 2.5 years each, while Bongiorno was handed a 6-year sentence. DePascali took the stand for a span of 6 weeks, and his testimony proved pivotal in the government's prosecution of Madoff's staff. DePascali ultimately didn't receive a sentencing. In March 2015, he had been diagnosed with lung cancer, and sadly, he passed away 2 months later. Working to recoup victims' funds. A portion of Madoff's victims were not even cognizant of their association with him. Certain hedge funds and feeder funds initiated accounts with Madoff without disclosing this to their clients. These clients comprised individuals, charitable organizations, and companies that had established retirement accounts for their employees. The companies had a degree of financial safeguarding, but their individual clients did not. Consequently, the individual clients suffered total losses. The protective mechanism safeguarding certain client investments was intricate. It was founded on the notion that clients who directly invested with a broker or firm that subsequently went bankrupt were eligible for up to $500,000 in coverage under the purview of the Securities Investor Protection Corporation, SIPC. However, not every individual who had invested directly with Madoff qualified for this form of financial recourse. A SIPC trustee meticulously reviewed each Madoff account, assessing the total funds invested and withdrawn throughout the account's existence. In instances where withdrawals exceeded investments, account holders were required to reimburse the surplus or face legal action. Furthermore, individuals who solely relied on the interest generated by their Madoff accounts or who established accounts for family members or left inheritances could find themselves in a precarious position. Not only did their accounts collapse, but they might also be in debt, despite never directly investing with Madoff. As previously stated, those secondary investors, individuals who entrusted their funds to financial professionals for investment purposes, such as retirement accounts or other managed funds, received no entitlements, or so it appeared. While the FBI persistently confiscated assets from Madoff and his accomplices, the worth of these assets was allocated to a victim compensation fund overseen by the Department of Justice. Investors in this category have the option to file a claim to recover a portion of their funds, although it's understood that they won't receive complete restitution. Legal proceedings are still in progress, with the SIPC trustee working diligently to retrieve funds from direct investors while claims are being pursued against forfeited assets. Through collaborative efforts between investigators and the trustee, they have managed to recover billions on behalf of the victims. The legacy of Madoff. The FBI maintains a steadfast focus on combating securities fraud, considering it a prominent and persistent threat. While there have been some adjustments made in the aftermath of Madoff's admission of guilt, the most significant shift has been the heightened recognition of the existence of this form of fraud. After this case, even the term Ponzi scheme gained greater prominence. When people suspect fraud, they often use the term saying, "I believe it's a Ponzi scheme." While they may not always be correct, the term has certainly become widely recognized. As we wrap up this journey through the Bernie Madoff case, one can't help but be struck by the enormity of the deception and the far-reaching consequences it had on countless lives. For the investors who lost their savings, the charities left in the lurch, and the financial industry forever changed, the scars of Madoff's Ponzi scheme continue to linger. Bernie Madoff, once a prominent figure in the world of finance, will forever be remembered as the architect of one of the most infamous financial frauds in history. His conviction and subsequent imprisonment served as a stark reminder that no matter how sophisticated the scheme, justice can and will prevail. Today, as we reflect on the Madoff case, let it stand as a testament to the importance of vigilance, transparency, and accountability in the world of finance. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the Bernie Madoff case. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into fascinating true crime stories and financial history.